October 23, 1918, 5:38 a.m. Trenches near Grand Pré, 77th Infantry Division sector. Private George Putnam from Philadelphia sat at the bottom of the trench, methodically loading cartridges into his pouch. 20 red shells of 12 gauge, each marked 00 buck. Beside him, leaning against the earthen wall, stood a Winchester Model 1897 trench gun, a weapon the Germans in captured reports called Grabenfeger, the trench broom. Putnam had been an insurance company clerk before the war, a man of actuarial tables and risk calculations. Now he operated with different numbers: 6 shells with 9 pellets each, 54 pieces of lead that the Winchester could throw into a trench faster than a rifleman could cycle his bolt twice. The Winchester looked simple: 20-inch barrel with perforated heat shield, pump-action mechanism, 16-inch bayonet. But Putnam knew this weapon's secret: a hammer without a disconnector. If you held the trigger down and pumped the forend, the shotgun fired automatically with each forward stroke. Slam fire, that's what they called it at the briefing. At 15 yards, each shot transformed into a fan of 9 trajectories, the width of a man's torso. Putnam didn't know that in Berlin, a protest had already been drafted. Germany demanded shotguns be banned as barbaric weapons violating the laws of war. German command threatened that any American captured with a Grabenfeger would be executed on the spot. But here, in the mud of the Argonne, legal arguments held no weight. What mattered was that when German shock troops burst into this trench at dawn, through the breach 30 yards to the right, Putnam's Winchester would create a zone where 20 feet became the final distance for anyone in a gray coat. One man with a shotgun against an assault group, an unequal fight. But the Winchester Model 1897 was rewriting the arithmetic of inequality. Artillery thundered overhead. It had begun. Putnam grabbed the shotgun, worked the action, and took position at the fire step. Dawn broke through the smoke of explosions. In 4 minutes, he would learn whether this weapon, which the Germans called diabolical and the American Army simply called trench gun, could turn theory into practice. What George Putnam held in his hands that morning was more than a modified hunting weapon. The Winchester Model 1897 trench gun represented a fundamental shift in the philosophy of close-quarters combat. A shift that would force military theorists, international lawyers, and enemy commanders to confront an uncomfortable truth. The trench warfare that had stalemated Europe for 4 years could be decisively influenced not by artillery barrages or massed infantry charges, but by the ability of individual soldiers to generate overwhelming firepower in confined spaces. The Winchester 1897 was a declaration of American intent in the most brutal theater of the Great War. The trench, where European armies relied on grenades, bayonets, and courage in the claustrophobic hell of underground warfare. The Americans introduced industrial logic. Transform one man into a crew-served weapon. Make the individual soldier a system of suppression. Turn narrow earthen corridors into killing zones controlled not by tactics, but by the mathematics of projectile density. This was the weapon's genius and its horror. In the geometry of trench combat, passages 4 feet wide, engagement distances measured in yards rather than hundreds of yards, confrontations lasting seconds. The Winchester M1897, with its slam fire capability, became something unprecedented, a force multiplier that didn't require additional men, additional training, or additional logistics. It required only the willingness to accept that modern war had evolved beyond the gentlemanly conventions of ranged rifle fire into something more primal and more mechanized simultaneously. The shotgun's arrival on the Western Front in 1918 sparked immediate controversy, precisely because it threatened to make obsolete the hard-won expertise of European shock troops. German Stoßtruppen had spent 3 years perfecting infiltration tactics, small unit maneuvers, grenade combinations, close-quarters pistol work. The French had their nettoyeurs de tranchées, trench cleaners armed with nail-studded clubs and sharpened shovels. The British refined the art of the trench raid into a choreographed violence of wire cutters, Mills bombs, and cold steel. And then the Americans arrived with pump-action shotguns. The Winchester model 1897 was not designed for war. John Moses Browning created it in 1893 as a sporting arm for waterfowl hunters who needed rapid follow-up shots at fast-moving targets. The pump-action design, where the fore-end slides backward to extract and eject the spent shell, then forward to chamber a fresh round and cock the hammer, was elegantly simple. Simpler still was Browning's decision to eliminate the trigger disconnector, the mechanism that requires a shooter to release and pull the trigger for each shot. Without this safety feature, the M1897 possessed a unique characteristic. If the trigger remained depressed, the weapon would fire immediately upon the bolt closing. Pump the action, the gun fires. Pump again, it fires again. Hunters called this slam fire and valued it for its speed against flying ducks. In 1918, the U.S. Army saw different potential. The military specifications for the trench gun variant were brutally practical. Standard barrel length was reduced from 28 inches to 20 inches, making the weapon maneuverable in confined spaces. A ventilated steel heat shield was added over the barrel, not for the shooter's comfort, but to prevent hands from blistering on the barrel during sustained fire in combat. A bayonet lug allowed attachment of the standard M1917 16-inch blade, transforming the shotgun into a viable weapon even after ammunition was exhausted. The ammunition itself represented a compromise between lethality and practicality. The standard military load was a 2 3/4-inch 12-gauge shell containing 9 pellets of .00 buckshot. Each pellet was 33 inches in diameter, weighing approximately 53.8 grains. At the muzzle, each pellet carried roughly 238 foot-pounds of energy. 9 pellets per shell meant 2,142 foot-pounds of energy per shot. Not concentrated in a single projectile like a rifle bullet, but distributed across a pattern that, at 15 yards, covered an area roughly 2 feet in diameter. The ballistics were straightforward and devastating. A rifleman armed with the standard M1903 Springfield could fire 15 aimed shots per minute under ideal conditions, 1 shot every 4 seconds, accounting for bolt manipulation and target acquisition. A soldier with a Winchester M1897 using slam fire could empty a 6-round magazine in approximately 5 seconds. The rate of fire wasn't simply faster, it was categorically different. The Winchester transformed individual marksmanship into area suppression. At 10 yards, the effective range inside most trenches, the shot pattern was tight enough that all 9 pellets would impact within a 12-inch circle, roughly the size of a human head and shoulders. At 20 yards, the pattern expanded to approximately 30 inches, wide enough to cover a man's entire torso. Beyond 35 yards, the pellets lost coherence and lethality. But this limitation was irrelevant in trench warfare where engagement distances rarely exceeded 20 yards. Winchester's factory in New Haven, Connecticut, received the first military contracts in early 1918. The company initially struggled to meet demand. The M1897 was still a current commercial product, and retooling for military specifications while maintaining civilian production created bottlenecks. By May 1918, Winchester had established dedicated military production lines capable of producing approximately 1,000 trench guns per month. By August, that number had doubled. The first shipments reached France in June 1918. By September, over 3,000 Winchester trench guns were in American hands on the Western Front. By November, that number exceeded 10,000. But raw production numbers obscured a more significant reality. The psychological and tactical impact of the weapon far exceeded its numerical presence. The U.S. Army had no established doctrine for shotgun employment in 1918. No training manuals existed. No tactics had been developed. The weapon arrived at the front lines with minimal guidance beyond basic safety instructions and a recognition that it might prove useful in trench fighting. Soldiers and junior officers developed tactics through experimentation and necessity. What emerged was a new grammar of close combat. The Winchester wasn't employed like a rifle, aimed fire at individual targets, nor was it used like a machine gun, sustained fire for suppression. Instead, it became something between a personal weapon that created collective effects. One man with a trench gun could control a section of trench not by hitting every enemy soldier, but by making that section of trench unenterable. Practical employment developed quickly. Soldiers learned that the Winchester excelled in 3 specific situations. First, when defending prepared positions where the enemy's avenue of approach was predictable and confined. A single soldier positioned at a junction or traverse could interdict multiple attackers with concentrated fire. Second, during counterattacks into captured trenches where rapid fire at close range could dislodge entrenched defenders before they could organize resistance. Third, in night fighting where aimed rifle fire was nearly impossible, but the shotgun's wide pattern remained effective. The weapon also revealed tactical limitations. Beyond 30 yards, it was effectively useless. A critical vulnerability in open warfare where engagement distances could extend to hundreds of yards. The ammunition was heavy and bulky. A soldier could carry perhaps 24 shells compared to 90 rifle rounds of similar weight. Reloading under stress proved difficult. Each shell had to be individually fed into the magazine tube, a process requiring fine motor control that deteriorated under combat stress. Most significantly, the Winchester required a specific temperament. Effective employment meant holding fire until the enemy was close, 15 to 20 yards, sometimes less. This demanded nerve that not every soldier possessed. The weapon rewarded aggression and punished hesitation. By October 1918, informal best practices had emerged. Trench gun operators worked in pairs when possible, 1 shooter, 1 loader. They positioned themselves at corners and junctions where they could cover multiple approaches. They learned to fire low, letting ricochets off trench walls multiply the effect of each shot. They discovered that the mere sound of the Winchester's distinctive action, the metallic clack-clack of the pump, could sometimes halt an enemy advance before it began. The Germans noticed. By September 1918, captured German documents showed that American sectors known to employ shotguns received specific tactical attention. German assault groups were instructed to use grenades heavily before entering trenches, to advance only under cover of smoke, and to prioritize killing shotgun-armed soldiers immediately. The weapon had become a tactical factor requiring response. On September 14, 1918, the German government filed a formal diplomatic protest through neutral channels. The document, addressed to the U.S. State Department via the Swiss Embassy, declared that the use of shotguns violated Article 23E of the 1899 Hague Convention, which prohibited arms, projectiles, or material calculated to cause unnecessary suffering. The German argument rested on medical grounds. German military physicians documented the wounds caused by buckshot, multiple penetrating injuries, each capable of striking bone, viscera, or major blood vessels. They argued that buckshot wounds were more likely to cause prolonged suffering than rifle bullets, which typically created cleaner entrance and exit wounds. The protest included affidavits from German surgeons describing the difficulty of treating soldiers hit by multiple pellets, the high infection rates, and the frequent necessity of amputation. The diplomatic language barely concealed genuine fury. German officers viewed the shotgun as fundamentally unfair, a weapon that required no skill, offered no chance for the target to defend himself, and violated the implicit rules of combat between professional soldiers. One captured German document described American shotgunners as murderers, distinguishing them from legitimate combatants. The threat accompanying the protest was explicit. Germany would consider captured American soldiers found in possession of shotguns as outside the protection of the Geneva Convention. They would be subject to immediate execution. The American response, drafted by the Judge Advocate General's office and delivered on September 19th, was equally blunt. The U.S. position held that shotguns did not violate any established convention. The Hague Convention prohibited weapons causing unnecessary suffering. But suffering was only unnecessary if the weapon failed to serve a legitimate military purpose. The shotgun's military utility in trench combat was self-evident. Moreover, the U.S. noted, Germany itself employed flamethrowers, poison gas, and serrated bayonets, weapons whose humanitarian credentials were questionable at best. The American response included its own threat. Any execution of American prisoners for carrying lawful weapons would be considered a war crime, and Germany would be held accountable through post-war tribunals. The U.S. would also consider retaliatory measures against German prisoners. The diplomatic exchange never reached resolution. By November 1918, the war ended. But the controversy revealed something significant. The Winchester M1897 had proven effective enough to provoke not just tactical countermeasures, but international legal challenges. The weapon had become symbolically important beyond its numerical presence. The Winchester's combat record was fragmentary and difficult to quantify. Unlike rifle or machine gun fire, which could be observed and documented, shotgun employment in close quarters left few objective records. What survived were personal accounts, after-action reports that mentioned the weapon in passing, and the evidence of German concern. Sergeant Daniel Daly of the 5th Marines, already a two-time Medal of Honor recipient, reportedly used a Winchester during the fighting in Belleau Wood in June 1918. According to witnesses, Daly employed the shotgun during close-quarters fighting in wooded areas where German positions were within 20 yards. His assessment was characteristically direct. The Winchester made trench clearing faster and safer than rifle and bayonet work. The 26th Yankee Division reported extensive Winchester employment during fighting near Seicheprey in April 1918. One company commander noted that a single soldier with a trench gun, positioned at a communication trench, had halted a German counterattack, forcing the enemy to withdraw and seek an alternate route. The tactical effect was disproportionate to the weapon's nominal firepower. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive in October 1918, multiple American divisions reported shotgun use in clearing German strongpoints. The 77th Division, fighting in the Argonne Forest, found the Winchester particularly valuable in close terrain fighting where visibility was limited and engagement distances were short. One battalion after-action report noted that trench gun operators typically expended 8 to 12 rounds per engagement, suggesting that the weapon's psychological effect often ended combat before magazines were emptied. The most telling evidence came from German sources. Captured German soldiers reported that American troops armed with shotguns were specifically targeted for immediate elimination. German squad leaders were instructed to identify shotgun-armed Americans by the weapon's distinctive profile and prioritize them as threats. This tactical attention suggested the weapon's impact exceeded its numbers. Medical records provided another perspective. American field hospitals treating German wounded occasionally noted unusual wound patterns. Multiple small-caliber penetrating injuries clustered in the torso or extremities, consistent with buckshot. While such wounds were relatively rare, buckshot didn't have the range to wound at distances where soldiers might survive to reach aid. Their occurrence confirmed the weapon's lethality at close range. The Winchester also revealed limitations in practice. Soldiers reported that the weapon's effectiveness declined rapidly in wet conditions. The exposed action allowed mud and water to enter the mechanism, causing malfunctions. The heat shield, while protecting hands, could become hot enough after sustained fire to produce visible heat shimmer, compromising concealment. The bayonet, while intimidating, made the weapon front-heavy and awkward to maneuver in very tight spaces. Perhaps most significantly, the shotgun proved most effective in the hands of experienced soldiers who understood its capabilities and limitations. New replacements often misused the weapon, firing at excessive range, failing to use the slam fire feature effectively, or positioning themselves poorly. The Winchester wasn't a weapon that compensated for poor training. It rewarded competence with disproportionate results. The Winchester M1897's true significance lay not in any single engagement, but in how it altered the tactical calculus of trench combat. Consider the geometry. A typical trench was 4 feet wide. A fire bay might be 15 feet long before a traverse, a deliberate bend designed to limit the effect of enfilade fire. In this confined space, traditional infantry weapons faced limitations. A rifleman with an M1903 Springfield in a 4-foot trench could engage targets effectively, but his rate of fire was limited by the bolt-action mechanism. Even a skilled shooter required approximately 3 seconds per shot, time to acquire the target, fire, work the bolt, and reacquire. 3 seconds was enough time for an attacking soldier to cover roughly 12 feet at a running sprint. At 20 yards, an attacker could close the distance in under 4 seconds. Time for perhaps 2 aimed shots. The tactical mathematics were unforgiving. A defending rifleman facing multiple attackers in a confined space would almost certainly be overwhelmed before he could fire enough shots to stop the assault. This reality drove the European emphasis on grenade warfare and bayonet fighting, weapons that could engage multiple targets or function in contact distance. The Winchester changed the equation. Assuming 6 rounds in the magazine and slam fire operation, a defender could deliver all 6 shots in approximately 5 seconds. Each shot projected 9 pellets across a pattern covering, at 15 yards, roughly 2 feet of lateral space. In a 4-foot wide trench, a single shot effectively interdicted the entire width of the passage. 6 shots created not just multiple chances to hit, but overlapping zones of lethality. The mathematical advantage wasn't merely theoretical. It manifested in practical outcomes. One soldier with a Winchester could control a section of trench that would normally require 3 or 4 riflemen. This force multiplication didn't require additional logistics, training, or coordination. It simply required placing the weapon in the right position and having ammunition. The Germans understood this. Their tactical instructions for assaulting American positions specifically addressed shotgun-armed defenders. Use smoke to obscure vision, employ grenades to force the defender away from advantageous positions, advance in multiple directions simultaneously to overwhelm single defenders. These weren't tactics required against ordinary riflemen. They were responses to a weapon that had fundamentally changed the local tactical balance. The Winchester M1897 trench gun remained in American military service long after the armistice. The weapon saw use in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, a remarkable longevity for a design created in the 1890s. But its most significant legacy wasn't its service life. It was the recognition that close-quarters combat represented a distinct tactical problem requiring specialized solutions. The M1897 demonstrated that industrial warfare wasn't only about artillery barrages and machine gun fire. In the confined spaces of trenches, buildings, and jungles, the ability to generate immediate, overwhelming firepower at close range could be tactically decisive. This lesson would be repeatedly relearned throughout the 20th century as military forces encountered urban combat, room clearing, and other scenarios where engagement distances collapsed to yards or feet. The weapon also highlighted an uncomfortable truth about modern warfare. Effectiveness and humanity existed in tension. The shotgun was militarily effective precisely because it was devastating at close range. The German protests weren't entirely hypocritical. Buckshot wounds were indeed horrific. But so were flamethrower burns, bayonet wounds, and the injuries from high explosive shells. Industrial warfare had moved beyond chivalric conventions. The Winchester simply made that reality more immediate and personal. For the American soldiers who carried the M1897 in 1918, the weapon represented something simpler, a tool that improved their odds of survival in the most dangerous environment of the war. In the mud of the Argonne, in the ruins of French villages, in the claustrophobic hell of trench fighting, the Winchester's ability to generate rapid fire at close range wasn't a legal abstraction or a tactical theory. It was the difference between controlling a section of trench and being overrun. When Private George Putnam shouldered his Winchester M1897 that October morning near Grand Pré, he was holding more than wood and steel. He was holding a declaration that American industry could transform even the most intimate form of combat. The close-quarters fight where men killed each other at arm's length, into a problem solvable through engineering and production. The Winchester Model 1897 trench gun never decided the outcome of the Great War. That was accomplished by artillery, logistics, blockades, and the exhaustion of empires. But in the narrow, muddy corridors where individual soldiers fought and died, the shotgun rewrote the rules. It proved that firepower density could be a personal attribute, not just a function of crew-served weapons. It demonstrated that American pragmatism, the willingness to adapt civilian tools to military purposes without concern for tradition or convention, could produce tactical advantages that European military establishments, bound by decades of doctrine, struggled to counter. The German protests, the diplomatic exchanges, the threats of execution, all confirmed what American soldiers already knew. The Winchester worked. It worked so well that it provoked not just tactical responses, but demands for its prohibition. In the brutal calculus of trench warfare, that was the highest compliment a weapon could receive.